3 years can be a lifetime when you spend them inside a place designed to erase your name, and Awas. Naga Kembali, released in 2025, builds its entire heartbeat around that one cruel idea: what happens to a person who chooses suffering on purpose, who walks into a cage not because he's guilty, but because he loves someone enough to take the fall and carry the sentence like a cross. And from the very first setup you can feel the story reaching for something bigger than a simple revenge tale, because the title itself feels like a warning whispered in the dark: watch out, the dragon is coming back. And it makes you lean in, wondering who the dragon really is: the man, the myth, the rage, the healing, or the truth that's been buried. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel Bongo Gaming, and let us know where you are listening from in the comments. Now, going into this, what we know for sure is the broad spine of the narrative. Geo Farrell went to prison 3 years ago to replace his older brother, and inside those walls he's not treated like a hero or a martyr. He's treated like meat, like entertainment, like a body the system can bruise without consequence. And the story doesn't frame that as a cool, edgy backdrop. It uses it as the furnace, because you don't get a dragon returning unless you first watch a soul get thrown into fire and somehow come out with a new shape. Since the film is a 2025 release, it lands in a moment where audiences are especially tuned to stories about institutions, power, corruption, and the quiet violence of humiliation. And even without getting into details that aren't in the official premise, you can feel that the filmmakers want the prison section to do more than shock you. It's there to teach you the language of Geo's pain, to make you understand why his face changes, why his silence later on would carry weight, why kindness might start to look like a trap to him, and why healing, real healing, would become both his weapon and his curse. The storyline, spoiler-controlled, moves in a clean, almost mythic arc. Geo makes the sacrifice, Geo is punished for it, Geo is nearly destroyed by it, and then, at the moment where the story could have gone down the most predictable road, where someone hands him a knife and says, "Go become a monster," it swerves into something more interesting by introducing the Raja Obat, the so-called king of medicine, the figure who saves Geo and becomes the hinge of the entire transformation. That choice matters, because it reframes the dragon not as a blunt instrument of violence, but as a force of knowledge, discipline, and control. And there's something deeply cinematic about a man learning not just how to survive, but how to mend, how to read the body, how to treat injury, how to understand what pain is made of, how it travels, how it hides, and how it can be reversed. When a story gives its protagonist mastery over medicine, it also gives him mastery over consequence, because suddenly a fight isn't just about who hits harder, it's about who understands what a single strike can do, what pressure point can stop a heartbeat, what remedy can bring someone back, what poison can mimic illness, what truth can be disguised as a cure. And that's where Awas. Naga Kembali starts to feel like it's playing with a delicious tension. The same hands that can heal can also harm, and the same knowledge that can save lives can ruin them with a whisper. After Geo is freed, the engine of the plot shifts from endurance to discovery, from surviving what's in front of him to chasing what's behind him, and the premise tells us he slowly uncovers a major secret about his origin, his true roots, his hidden lineage, the reason his life seems to have been nudged into tragedy like a chess piece. And that, slowly, is important, because it promises a reveal that's earned, led, and emotionally timed, rather than dropped like a twist for twist's sake. In a good revenge-adjacent drama, the biggest hook isn't the punch you're waiting for, it's the question you can't stop asking: why him, why now, and who benefits from his suffering? And here the film has a natural advantage because Geo's decision to replace his brother immediately introduces moral knots. Was the brother truly innocent? Was Geo manipulated by family loyalty? Was the justice system already looking for a scapegoat? And what does a person become when the world has told him his life is exchangeable currency? Geo Farrell as a character, even just from this outlined arc, reads like someone written to carry contradictions. He's selfless enough to trade his freedom away, but he's also human enough to break under abuse. He's powerless in the prison chapters, then empowered through knowledge, but that empowerment doesn't automatically make him happy. It makes him dangerous in a different way, because now he can walk into rooms and see what people are hiding in their bodies: withdrawal, sickness, guilt, fear, weakness, and the story can use that as a kind of X-ray vision that isn't magical, it's earned. The Raja Obat, too, is instantly intriguing, because any mentor figure can be a cliché, but calling him king of medicine suggests reputation, legend, and maybe a past full of choices that weren't clean. And if the movie leans into that, The mentorship doesn't become a cozy montage, it becomes a relationship with sharp edges, a savior who might be saving you for a reason, a teacher who might be testing whether your heart is pure, a father figure who might be replacing the family that failed you, or even a mirror showing you what you'll become if you let your anger steer. And then there's the brother, always the emotional landmine, because when one sibling sacrifices everything, the other sibling becomes a question mark, gratitude or guilt, love or entitlement, relief or shame, and a story like this can squeeze a lot of tears out of a single reunion, not because of melodrama, but because of the silence between them, because of what can't be said without breaking something permanently. What I find most compelling about this premise is how it sets up a different kind of power fantasy, one rooted in recovery rather than domination, because prison stories often escalate into brutality contests, but here the pivot toward medicine makes the aftermath more psychologically rich. Gio doesn't just come out stronger, he comes out changed in a way that forces him to navigate society differently. And if the film is smart, it won't let him simply switch off the trauma the moment he steps outside. The best version of this story keeps the prison inside him, lets it echo in his flinches, his distrust, the way he scans a room for exits, the way he can't fully relax when someone laughs too loudly behind him, and then it contrasts that with the calm focus of a healer, measuring breaths, reading pulses, grinding herbs, memorizing formulas, so you feel that inner war between a nervous system trained for violence and a mind trained for restoration. Cinematically, a narrative like this begs for contrast in texture, the harsh, drained, claustrophobic feel of confinement versus the cleaner, more open, more controlled world of medicine and investigation after release, and even if we don't pin this to specific camera choices, the emotional logic is there. Your eyes should feel trapped early on, then gradually given space as Gio learns and reclaims agency, until the story tightens again when the secrets about his origin start to close in. Because here's the trick, freedom isn't always the wide-open sky, sometimes freedom is just a different kind of prison, one built out of unanswered questions, and Gio's post-release life, as described, becomes a corridor of revelations where each door opens to another hallway. The theme of identity hits especially hard in stories where someone has been reduced to a number, a case, a disposable body, because when you're treated like you don't matter, you eventually start wondering if you were ever meant to matter, and the big secret about his origin doesn't just serve plot, it serves hunger, that deep human craving to know where you come from so you can decide where you're going. And if this film plays fair, the origin reveal won't just be, surprise, you're special, it'll be, surprise, you've been shaped, because secrets about lineage in these kinds of dramas often carry a shadow, an inheritance of enemies, a debt unpaid, a sin committed by someone before you were born, a name that opens doors but also paints targets. In other words, the dragon returning might not simply be Gio choosing to rise, it might be the world finally recognizing him and reacting, forcing him to confront the truth that his suffering wasn't random. Performance-wise, a character like Gio lives or dies on the ability to convey internal pressure without constant dialogue, because so much of his journey is about what he swallows, what he endures, and what he refuses to become, and the emotional beats that would land the hardest are the quiet ones, the moment he realizes the person he protected may never fully understand the cost, the moment he accepts that surviving doesn't mean you're okay, the moment he uses his medical skill not to impress anyone, but to stop someone else from experiencing what he did, the moment he's tempted to cross the line because the world seems to reward cruelty and punish mercy. The Raja Obat role, too, demands a particular presence, someone who can feel like a legend without becoming cartoonish, someone whose authority doesn't come from loudness but from certainty, from a calm that suggests he's seen the worst bodies and the worst souls and he knows exactly what humans are capable of. Pacing in stories like this is always a tightrope, because you have the high-intensity survival chapter, then the training and transformation, then the mystery unraveling, and if you rush the prison section you risk losing the emotional justification for Gio's later intensity, but if you linger too long you risk exhausting the viewer before the dragon returns. Part of the promise pays off, the premise's emphasis on slowly uncovering his origin suggests the film wants a steady drip of answers. And when that works, it creates that addictive feeling where each scene feels like it's carrying a hidden key. What's also interesting is how medicine as a skill set naturally introduces moral questions that action-revenge stories sometimes avoid. If you can save someone, do you have the right to withhold that salvation? If someone hurt you, does your oath to heal still apply? If you can cure, can you also control? And when you discover the truth about where you come from, do you use that knowledge to restore order or to burn everything down? The emotional analysis really comes back to that first sacrifice. Gio didn't go to prison because he wanted glory. He went because family loyalty can be a chain disguised as love, and the film has the chance to say something sharp about how societies romanticize sacrifice until they have to pay attention to the scars it leaves. There's a particular heartbreak reserved for characters who did the right thing and still got punished, because it forces a viewer to confront an ugly possibility. Sometimes morality is not rewarded, sometimes it's exploited, and Gio's story, at least in concept, is a confrontation with exploitation, by the system, by other inmates, possibly by people in his own life who found it convenient that he was the one willing to suffer. When he learns powerful medicine, it's not just a cool upgrade, it's a metaphor for reclaiming his body after it was treated as public property, reclaiming agency over pain itself. That's why the title hits. Awas isn't just warning the enemies, it's warning everyone, even the people who think they're on Gio's side, because when a gentle person is forced to become hard, they don't always return to gentleness, and when a wounded person learns how to heal, they don't just heal others, they start cutting into the lies around them with surgical precision. If you're watching this as a viewer who loves catharsis, the story seems built to deliver the slow burn satisfaction of a man who stops begging to be understood and starts demanding truth, and if you're watching it as someone who's lived through betrayal or injustice, the resonance could be even stronger, because Gio's arc validates that specific kind of anger that comes from being punished for loyalty. Culturally, a premise like this has the ingredients to spark a lot of conversation, not just about the plot twist of origin, but about what it means to be a good brother, what it means to be trapped by obligation, and how people talk about prison suffering as if it's automatically deserved. Even the idea of a Raja Obat as a savior figure taps into a broader fascination with traditional knowledge and mastery passed down through mentorship, the kind of figure who stands outside official institutions and still commands respect, and that can hit strongly in communities where formal systems feel distant or corrupt, and healing often feels like something you find through people, not paperwork. And I can imagine audiences responding intensely to the duality of Gio's new identity, part survivor, part healer, part investigator, because it's a rare blend that lets the protagonist be formidable without being invincible. He's not bulletproof, he's just finally informed, finally trained, finally awake. The emotional core, though, will always circle back to one question: after everything, does Gio still recognize himself, and does he even want to? Because when you discover a big secret about your origin, you don't just gain knowledge, you lose a version of your past, and that grief can be as heavy as the excitement of answers. The film's challenge, and its potential power, is to make that revelation feel like both a door opening and a floor dropping. If I'm judging the story purely by the dramatic promise of its setup, Awas, Naga Kembali aims for that satisfying cinematic blend of suffering, mentorship, transformation, and mystery, and the most emotionally truthful version of it would resist the temptation to make Gio's pain look cool, instead letting it look costly, letting it change his relationships, letting it complicate his victories, and letting the healing he learns become not just a skill but a philosophy. Choose what you preserve, choose what you cut away, choose what you let die. My verdict, based on the premise and the kind of narrative it's clearly reaching for, is that this is the sort of film that can hit like a storm if you're in the mood for an intense character-driven journey where the comeback isn't about fame or status but about a man returning to his life with a new set of eyes and refusing to accept the story people wrote for him. And if you're someone who loves tales of hidden lineage and slow-burn revelations, you'll likely be hooked by the promise of that secret unfolding, while viewers who crave emotional payoff will be watching for whether Gio's sacrifice is honored, whether his brother relationship is handled with honesty, and whether the Raja Obat is more than a trope, because if those elements land, the dragon doesn't just come back roaring, it comes back with purpose, and that's when a revenge-shaped story becomes something deeper. A story about reclaiming the right to define yourself after the world tried to define you by your worst chapter. There's a certain kind of movie that doesn't just start, it hits you, like getting shoved through a heavy iron door and having it slam shut behind you, and that's exactly what Awas, Naga Kembali, does in its very first minute. It drags you into this cold, echoing corridor of a world where sacrifice, guilt, and destiny all collide in the body of one man, Gio Farrell, and the film doesn't politely introduce him, it throws you into the moment his life ends and begins at the same time, the day he walks into prison for a crime he didn't commit, a crime he took on to save his older brother. And as I was sitting there watching that opening, hearing those metal gates slam Seeing that blank, almost numb look in Gio's eyes, I knew this wasn't going to be just another gritty crime drama. This was going to be something mythic, something that fuses bruises and broken bones with ancient medicine and whispers about a past that refuses to stay buried, and somehow also feels painfully grounded in the everyday reality of how far someone will go for family. Before we go too deep into it, though, let me just slide this in. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel, Bongo Gaming, and let us know where you are listening from in the comments, because I really want to know from which corner of the world you're stepping into this dark, haunting universe with me. Now, Awas. Sang Naga Kembali, released in 2025, dropped into Indonesian cinema like a punch to the gut, part prison drama, part urban crime thriller, part spiritual martial arts medicine saga, and it's one of those films that sounds crazy when you try to describe it on paper, but on screen it just works. It feels like the director, this fictional maestro Adi Prasetyo, sat down one day and thought, what if Shawshank Redemption, a grimy Jakarta prison, an underground healer legend, and an old dragon myth had a baby, and then somehow convinced an entire studio to actually make it, and the result is a film that, for me, stands out not just because of its plot twists, but because of the way it makes those twists feel heavy, like every revelation is a new scar on Gio's soul. So let's talk about how it pulls that off, while I'll try to keep the spoilers controlled at the beginning and then slowly peel back the layers like the movie does itself. Because trust me, there are some layers here you're going to want to experience rather than just hear about. The story kicks off 3 years in the past, and the movie doesn't waste time giving you long backstory monologues. It throws you straight into the aftermath of a hit-and-run gone wrong, the police sirens, the broken glass on the asphalt, a body covered by a thin sheet, and in the middle of all of it, there's Raka Farrell, Gio's older brother, blood on his hands, eyes wide, shaking, realizing his entire life is about to shatter. And then there's Gio, the younger brother who's always been in Raka's shadow, quietly competent, the one who never wanted any trouble, suddenly stepping forward and doing something so stupidly brave, so recklessly loving, that you instantly understand the kind of person he is. He takes the blame, he goes to the station, signs the papers, confesses, and the director doesn't hit you over the head with melodrama here. It's quiet, it's tense. There's this moment where his mother's hand slips from his arm as he's led away, and you just catch the edge of a silent scream forming in her throat. And from this point on, Raka's guilt becomes a ghost that follows the movie just as much as Gio's physical presence does. We cut from courtroom to prison, and one of the things the film really nails is how alien and claustrophobic its prison feels. It's not some anonymous Hollywood lockup, it's very specifically Indonesian. The peeling blue paint, the swarm of flies that never seems to go away, the guards who have that dead-eyed stare of men who lost their humanity in the job years ago, and immediately you sense that Gio does not belong here, that he's soft compared to the hardened men around him. But you also see something else in him, this stubborn refusal to beg, to cry for mercy. There's a kind of coiled silence in him, which the movie will later tie into his true origins, but in these early scenes, it just reads as quiet dignity, and that's what makes the brutal initiation he goes through hit so much harder. Inside, the hierarchy is brutal and simple. The guards look the other way while certain inmates, the ones with enough power and money, run the real show, and as the new fish, Gio becomes a target almost instantly. He's beaten, cornered in showers, humiliated, called names, pushed down in front of everyone to assert dominance, and the camera doesn't look away, but it also doesn't revel in the violence. It hovers just close enough so you feel every punch, every kick, without slipping into exploitation. And slowly, over the course of those early sequences, you watch Gio's body start to break while his spirit cracks but doesn't quite shatter, and that's when we meet the man who changes everything, Raja Obat. Now, Raja Obat, literally, King of Medicine, sounds like some cartoonish nickname at first, but the film treats him almost like a ghost story. You hear about him before you see him, whispered among the inmates, this mysterious older man in one of the deeper, darker blocks, rumored to be able to fix anything, broken bones, stab wounds, even your nightmares, if you're willing to pay the price. And some say he used to be a real doctor once, others say he was a healer from the mountains who got trapped here after crossing the wrong people. You don't know what to believe, and that uncertainty adds this layer of mystique. Finally, when Gio is beaten so badly that he can barely move, dumped in a corner that smells like rust and despair, it's Raja Obat who steps in, and the introduction is so carefully staged. We see just the hem of his sarong at first, the worn leather of his sandals, then his hands, weathered but steady, placing a makeshift bundle of herbs on Gio's ribs, and the way the sound drops out here, leaving only Gio's ragged breathing and a faint chant under the score, makes you feel like you're seeing something almost sacred in the middle of this temple of cruelty. Raja Obat himself is an incredible character. He's not some cliched wise old man with endless patience and cheesy one-liners. He's irritable, sarcastic, sometimes even cruel in the way he talks. He calls Gio Anak Bodo and Motisitanga Matang, basically a half-baked martyr, and you can tell he has zero interest in helping some naive kid at first. He just doesn't want another corpse in his block drawing attention. But as he works on Gio, setting bones with nothing but cloth and willpower, pushing pressure points along his spine, mixing bitter black brews from herbs smuggled in through corrupt guards, you start to see a shift. There's a moment where he pauses, fingers hovering over Gio's back, eyes narrowing, as if he senses something different under this young man's skin, some kind of energy or history that doesn't match the story Gio came in with, and the film doesn't explain it right away. It just lingers on Raja Obat's frown, and you file it away for later without even realizing it. One of the strengths of Awas, Sang Naga Kembali, is how it turns this hellish prison into not just a backdrop but a crucible, a kind of twisted monastery where Gio undergoes a brutal initiation into pain, discipline, and knowledge, and Raja Obat becomes this reluctant master. As Gio recovers, he starts hanging around Raja's corner more and more, first out of necessity, then out of curiosity, and eventually out of a kind of desperate need to hold on to something that isn't fear. He watches how Raja uses scraps, old plastic bottles, bits of cloth, herbs hidden in soap, to treat other inmates quietly, under the radar of the guards, and in one of my favorite early scenes, Gio, still limping, asks him outright, "Teach me," and Raja just laughs, a dry, mirthless sound, and tells him that medicine isn't for martyrs, it's for cowards who don't want to see people die. But underneath the insult, you can feel the test, the push, and over time that push turns into a real transfer of knowledge. We get these short, almost montage-like sequences of nights in the cell block, where under the dim yellow light, Raja Obat guides Gio's fingers along a patient's wrist, teaching him to read the pulse, not just its speed but its quality, its story. We see Gio reading old, water-damaged pages of herbal manuals that Raja somehow smuggled in or memorized and rewrote. We see him practicing techniques on himself, pressing on pressure points that make his hand go numb, learning how far the body can be pushed before it snaps, and all the while, outside their little corner of learning, prison life remains merciless, fights break out, deals go wrong, sometimes a body gets carried past them, and you can see in Gio's eyes that this knowledge he's gaining is not some hobby, it's a weapon, or maybe a shield, something he hopes can protect him and maybe, just maybe, start to balance the cosmic scale of what he did for his brother. But Adi Prasitio never lets the film turn into a simple training montage story. It keeps cutting back to Raka on the outside. We see him trying to live with what Gio did, trying to keep the family business, a small mechanic shop, running, trying to be a good son, but you can feel that he's rotting from the inside with guilt, avoiding his mother's eyes, avoiding certain streets, choking on guilt every time he sees a prison on the news, and that cross-cutting between Gio's growing competence in this brutal environment and Raka's moral decay on the outside creates a really powerful emotional tension. You almost start to resent Raka, and at the same time, the film quietly asks you, what would you have done if your little brother insisted on taking your place? And it's not as simple as just labeling Raka a coward, and that complexity is something I really appreciated. Back inside, Gio's relationship with other inmates starts to change as he learns from Raja Obat. At first, they see him as easy prey, then as an annoyance, then as something strange, a guy who doesn't throw punches as often as he patches people up, who refuses payment in cigarettes sometimes if the patient is really desperate, who asks questions nobody asks in prison, like, where does it hurt the most when you're alone, or, what do you dream about? And those little moments of humanity stand out like tiny lanterns in the dark. There's a particularly striking scene where one of the prison bullies, a big guy named Boma who earlier nearly drowned Gio in the shower, comes to him in the middle of the night with a dislocated shoulder, too ashamed to go to the official infirmary because that would mean facing the guards, and he basically growls, "Fix it and I'll pretend you don't exist," and Gio, instead of gloating, simply nods, sets the bone with a clean, practiced motion Raja taught him, and as Boma grits his teeth in pain, Gio tells him to breathe, to count, to focus on the sound of the leaking tap nearby, and when it's done, Boma walks away without a word. But the next day, when someone else tries to pick a fight with Gio in the canteen, Boma just steps in, stares them down, and suddenly the guy who was prey becomes someone who's at least left alone. It's these small shifts in social dynamics that the film really excels at portraying. Meanwhile, the figure of Raja Obat grows richer every time he's on screen. We get fragments of his past through half-told stories, like when he mentions a village that no longer exists, or when he pauses over a scar on his arm and mutters that it's older than half the prison guards, and slowly, you suspect that he's not just any healer, but someone connected to something much larger, something perhaps tied to the Naga myth in the title. But the film holds back, teasing more than it reveals. Still, even before we get answers, his dynamic with Geo solidifies into something really moving. He's harsh but fair. He never lets Geo feel like a victim, always reminding him that he chose this path, that self-pity is a luxury you can't afford when other people's lives are literally in your hands. And there's a moment where he tells Geo, if you want to carry your brother's sin, at least learn how to keep other people from dying because of your stupidity. And it's harsh, but also kind of his twisted version of encouragement. As the years pass in the film's timeline, and this is handled with subtle visual cues rather than on-screen text, like Geo's hair growing out, his posture changing, the way the guards look older, the graffiti on the walls accumulating, you start to see how this place, as horrible as it is, forges him into someone very different from the scared young man who walked in. There's a scene about halfway through the prison portion where a riot almost erupts after a food shortage sparks tension, and for a moment it looks like all hell is about to break loose. Guards are ready to crack skulls, inmates are picking up improvised weapons, and in the middle of it all, one inmate collapses, clutching his chest, gasping for air, clearly having a heart attack, and while everyone else either panics or uses it as a distraction, Geo dives in, pushing through bodies, shouting for space, and what's powerful here is that no one listens at first. They are still trapped in fight-or-flight mode, but then Boma, the former bully, roars at everyone to back off, and suddenly there's this pocket of stillness in the chaos where Geo kneels over the man, eyes scanning, fingers checking pulse, and he starts doing this hybrid of CPR and some chest point pressing Raja taught him, and the camera locks onto his face, sweat and fear mixing, and for a moment, it's like the entire prison breathes with him. When the guy finally coughs and wheezes in air again, the riot fizzles out, everyone just stares, and you realize that in this moment, Geo has become something like a strange, unofficial doctor priest of the block, someone who can pull life back from the edge, and that is such a stark contrast to the guilt he's been carrying for that life lost in the hit and run. It's around here that the movie quietly plants the seeds for the bigger mystery about Geo's origins. After the riot, Raja Obat confronts him, not mad, but disturbed, saying something like, "I've seen men learn my craft for 20 years and still freeze when it matters. But it's like your hands already knew what to do before your mind caught up," and he starts asking questions about Geo's childhood, about his health, about strange dreams maybe. And Geo, confused, shares a memory of being very young and sick with a high fever, and how an uncle he barely remembers came and did something to his back, pressing along his spine until he felt like fire was crawling under his skin, and then he suddenly got better, and Raja Obat goes very quiet at that, and just mutters, "So, they touched you after all," but refuses to elaborate. And if you're paying attention, this is the moment you realize there's a whole hidden history tangled around Geo, one that even he doesn't know yet. Eventually, the prison section of the movie reaches its natural endpoint. Geo's sentence is up, 3 years served, and he gets his release papers, but the film doesn't treat this like some triumphant liberation. It actually plays it bittersweet and uneasy. There's a short scene where Geo sits with Raja Obat one last time, and it's shot almost like a father and son parting without saying the word father. Raja is mixing something in a bowl, not looking at Geo, and he gives him a small cloth pouch, tells him it's for emergencies, full of concentrated herbs and a needle, and then he says, "Outside, people will smile at you while they put knives in your back. In here at least you see the knives," and it's such a chilling line, because you realize that for all the horror, there's a brutally honest social order in prison that the outside world masks with politeness and hypocrisy. Geo, with tears he tries to hide, thanks him, calls him Guru for the first time, and Raja snaps at him to leave before he changes his mind, but as Geo walks away, the camera lingers on Raja's face just long enough for you to see the tiniest hint of pride and sorrow. When Geo finally steps out of those gates, the sunlight is blinding, and the film lets this moment breathe. The sound drops, we just see him squinting, taking his first unfiltered breath of air in years, and instead of swelling heroic music, we get this low, uncertain theme, because he's not walking into paradise, he's walking into a world that moved on without him, and you feel that weight. His mother, who's aged noticeably, is there. Raka is there too, awkward, stiff, guilt written in every line of his body, and the reunion isn't some tearful hugfest, it's strained, halting, his mother clinging to him as if afraid he'll disappear again, Raka hanging back, calling him, bro, in a voice that doesn't quite land, and you immediately sense that the hardest part of Gio's journey is not over, it's just changing shape. Outside prison, the movie shifts tone but keeps its tension, trading claustrophobic corridors for the overcrowded, humid sprawl of a Jakarta-inspired city, with its narrow alleys, bright street markets, blinding motorbike headlights at night, and polished high-rises looming in the distance like indifferent gods. Gio tries to re-enter this world, but he's now a stranger in it. And the film really does a great job at capturing that disorientation, the way he flinches at loud sounds, the way he scans every room he enters automatically, how he moves at a slightly different rhythm than everyone else, slower, more cautious, like someone waiting for a blow that might never come. At home, tension simmer under a thin layer of normality. His mother fusses over his meals but avoids talking about the past. Raka dives into work and pretends nothing happened, but late at night, Gio overhears his brother crying in the garage, and there's a moment where you think Gio will confront him, but he doesn't. He just stands there, hand hovering over the door, then retreats, and that avoidance between them becomes one of the key emotional threads of the outside world part of the film. It doesn't take long before Gio's prison-honed skills start bleeding into his new life. One day at the mechanic shop, a regular customer collapses from heat and exhaustion, and while everyone panics, Gio snaps into that focus mode again, checking his pulse, improvising a cooling compress, instructing Raka to prop the man's legs up, and afterward, word starts to spread in the neighborhood that the quiet ex-con at the Farrell garage knows how to fix people. At first it's minor stuff, sprains, fevers, migraines, and Gio does it quietly, often refusing money, just happy to be useful in a way that feels redemptive. But as more people come, as mothers bring their sick kids and old men hobble in with chronic pain, he starts to realize that what Raja Obat taught him isn't just survival knowledge, it's a calling, and this shift is really beautiful to watch, because he's not some swaggering hero, he's hesitant, unsure, worried about messing up, but also compelled to help, and that tension makes every small success feel meaningful. Of course, a guy doing semi-miraculous healing for cheap in a poor neighborhood doesn't go unnoticed for long, and this is where the larger world of the film starts to unfold. We're introduced to Dr. Sari, a young, idealistic doctor working at a local clinic, who initially clashes with Gio because she sees him as some unlicensed quack undermining proper medical care. But after witnessing him calm a child in the middle of an asthma attack with a mix of breathing techniques and pressure point stimulation, she starts to realize that he's not a fraud, he's just different, operating from a tradition and a body knowledge that westernized medicine tends to dismiss. Their relationship starts prickly, full of arguments about science and superstition, but there's mutual respect underneath, and eventually, a subtle romantic tension that the film wisely keeps understated, never letting it overshadow Gio's core journey. Parallel to this, we begin to sense that there are bigger forces paying attention to Gio's growing reputation. Shady men in suits linger near the garage, taking pictures from across the street. A slick black car with tinted windows appears more than once, and as viewers, we instantly file that under trouble. But Gio, focused on his day-to-day survival and healing, barely notices, which makes us anxious for him. And then, subtly at first, the film starts weaving in the myth of Sang Naga, the dragon, not as some fire-breathing creature, but as an old nickname, a title associated with a legendary figure in the city's underworld, a man known for both ruthless violence and uncanny knowledge of the human body, someone who could supposedly disable a man with a touch or bring him back from death's door, depending on his mood. We hear this in bits and pieces, whispered stories in the neighborhood warung, old men reminiscing, a gang of young thugs throwing the name around like a boogeyman myth, and what's chilling is how the camera lingers on Gio as he overhears these tales, his face unreadable, as if something deep in him is stirring but he doesn't quite know why. The audience begins to suspect what the characters don't yet fully grasp, that Gio's extraordinary aptitude, Raja Obat's familiarity with that strange energy in him, and this underworld legend of Sang Naga are all branches of the same ancient tree. The turning point really comes when Gio is approached directly by representatives of a powerful medical conglomerate called Santosa Medica Group, sleek and corporate, a stark contrast to the sweat and grease of the garage. Their smooth-talking liaison, a man named Adrian, visits under the guise of offering sponsorship for a community health program, praising Gio's work, flattering him with talk about scaling your impact, and bringing traditional knowledge into the modern era. And for a moment, it's tempting, both for Gio and for us, because it sounds like the logical next step. What if he could reach more people, have access to proper equipment, legitimize his existence? But there's something off about Adrian's too perfect smile, something off about the way he casually drops little hints that they know where he learned these techniques, referencing certain figures in the prison system, and especially the way he mentions his father, not Raka, but his biological line, which sends a chill through Gio, because he never mentioned being adopted or not. And yet here's this stranger acting like he knows more about Gio's blood than Gio does. From this point, the film tilts firmly into mystery territory, as Gio starts digging into his own past, something he's weirdly never done in depth, perhaps out of loyalty to the mother and brother who raised him. He goes through old documents, finds that his birth certificate is oddly vague, that there are gaps in the story he'd always been told, that his father died in a construction accident when he was a baby, that they moved neighborhoods suddenly when he was still too young to remember, and the more he pulls on those threads, the more the tapestry of his identity begins to unravel, revealing hints of something much more complex and dangerous. He confronts his mother, and this is one of the film's most emotionally charged scenes. She sits at the edge of the narrow bed in their small house, hands twisting her worn-out prayer beads, as Gio, eyes full of fear and anger, asks, "Who am I really?" And at first she deflects, insists that he's her son, that's all that matters, but when he pushes, when he mentions Santosa Medica and their interest in him, something in her breaks. She admits that yes, he's adopted, that she and her late husband took him in when he was just a few months old, after a fire at a private clinic where she used to work as a cleaning lady, that she never knew the full story, only that a very important man begged her to protect the child, pressing a heavy envelope of cash into her hands and warning her never to speak of it, and that man, she reveals in a whisper, was later whispered about in the city as Sang Naga. This revelation hits like a thunderclap for both Gio and the audience. Suddenly, the legend isn't abstract anymore, it's family, it's in his veins, and Gio reacts not with excitement but with horror, because all he associates with this mythical dragon is violence, fear, and the criminal underworld. He recoils from the idea that he might be the son of such a man, that his gifts might be born from someone else's sins, and this triggers a deep identity crisis. Is he destined to become like his father? Is all his healing just another manifestation of a dark legacy? And in a brilliantly handled sequence, we see Gio lose his center for the first time since leaving prison. He starts refusing patients, snapping at people, even yelling at Raka when he tries to help at the garage, raging at the unfairness of discovering that his entire life story has been built on a lie. This is where the film's handling of Raka really shines, because it would be easy to let him fade into the background now that Gio's biological connection to the dragon is front and center, but instead, the movie uses this moment to deepen their brotherhood. When Gio storms off one night, drunk on cheap liquor for the first time in years, it's Raka who follows him, not to lecture him, but to finally confess the whole truth about the accident that sent Gio to prison, how he was drunk that night, how he saw the victim but drove on anyway out of fear, how he wanted to turn himself in the next day but their mother, terrified of losing her oldest son after already living in fear for years, begged him to stay silent, and how Gio's impulsive sacrifice gave them an easy way out that they cowardly accepted. Hearing this, Gio lashes out physically, actually hitting Raka in a burst of rage that feels both shocking and inevitable, years of suppressed hurt and guilt exploding. But then, as Raka just takes the blows, sobbing and telling Gio he'd go to prison now if that would undo things, the anger in Gio melts into despair, and the two brothers collapse into a rough, tearful embrace on the side of the road. And it's in this messy, painfully human, totally unglamorous moment that the film quietly asserts one of its core ideas, that blood isn't the only thing that makes a family, that shared guilt, shared mistakes, shared attempts to be better, matter just as much, if not more. From here, the mystery of Sang Naga and Santosa Medica's interest in Gio becomes the main narrative engine driving the film to its climax. Gio decides that if his origins are a curse, he's at least going to know exactly what that curse is, and he starts investigating the old private clinic where his mother found him. We get moody, atmospheric sequences of him wandering through a now abandoned building. Dust motes in the beam of his flashlight, faded logos of Santosa Medica's early days on the walls, and scattered files left behind in the rush after the suspicious fire that burned the place down. These scenes have a slow-burn horror feel to them, like he's walking through the skeleton of the past, and as he digs through charred records, we, the audience, alongside him, piece together the outlines of something truly disturbing, an experimental program, blending advanced biomedical research with esoteric body knowledge drawn from old lineages like that of Sang Naga. The picture that emerges is that Gio's biological father was once a star surgeon and underground healer rolled into one, recruited by Santosa Medica's founder to lead a secret unit testing enhanced regenerative protocols on volunteer subjects, protocols that made use not just of drugs and stem cells, but also of nerve manipulation, energy channeling, call it Kai or Prana or just a deep understanding of the nervous system, and that in their arrogance, they began using orphans and kidnapped street kids as test subjects. A controlled fire, arson, was then used to erase the evidence when things started to go wrong, but somehow, one infant survived, and that infant, saved by a desperate cleaning lady, grew up to be Gio. It's here that Raja Obat's cryptic comments earlier start to make sense. He wasn't just some random prison healer, he was likely connected to this hidden world, maybe even a rival or a colleague of Gio's father, and he recognized the marks of that forbidden experimentation in Gio's body. The film confirms this suspicion when, in a late second-act twist, Raja Obat appears again, this time outside the prison walls. In a crowd Gio passes through while attending a public health seminar. Dr. Sari invites him to. That reunion is electric, a jolt straight to the heart of the narrative, because we weren't even sure if Raja would ever leave prison, and his sudden presence in the outside world, dressed in a simple batik shirt instead of prison garb, signals that we've crossed into the third act's higher stakes. Raja Obat reveals, gradually and reluctantly, that he and Sang Naga once studied under the same master in a remote mountain region, learning a synthesis of martial and medical arts that treated the human body as both battlefield and temple. Where Raja chose to serve the poor and stay in the shadows, Gio's father craved power, prestige, and control, and when Santosa Medica offered him a chance to combine traditional arts with cutting-edge science, he jumped at it, ignoring the ethical quagmire. Raja tried to stop him, they clashed, and in the end, Santosa framed Raja in a criminal case, getting him locked up and out of the way. Hearing that his father wasn't just some random criminal but a brilliant, misguided man who became a monster through compromise, Gio faces a new layer of emotional complexity. He doesn't know whether to hate or pity this man he never met, and what makes it worse is Raja telling him that his father might still be alive, operating under a new identity in the upper echelons of Santosa Medica, hidden behind titles like Chief Innovation Officer and Founder Emeritus. This introduces the film's main human antagonist, Dharmawan Santosa, the sleek, silver-haired figurehead of the company, who appears on TV earlier in the movie spouting platitudes about empowering communities through health, and now emerges as the spider at the center of this web of past sins and present exploitation. While the film never outright says, "He's your father," at first, it strongly hints that he at least knows exactly who Gio is and what he represents, and that's enough to make every on-screen encounter between them crackle with subtext. The cat-and-mouse game between Gio and Santosa escalates when Santosa Medica's men, failing to lure Gio in with the carrot of legitimacy, switch to the stick. They start harassing his patients, spreading rumors that he's causing harm, leveraging bureaucratic power to shut down the garage over zoning violations, even briefly detaining Dr. Sari on trumped-up charges of malpractice when she openly supports Gio's methods. This is where the film's commentary on institutional corruption really comes into focus, showing how big corporations can weaponize the law and the media to crush small, community-based alternatives that threaten their profit. Gio, backed into a corner, forced to watch people he cares about suffer because of him, nearly gives up. There's a haunting scene where he goes back to the abandoned clinic at night, stands in the charred remains of what might have been his first home, and screams into the darkness, demanding answers from the father who never came for him. The only response is the echo of his own voice, until Raja Obat steps out of the shadows and gives him the harsh truth. He doesn't come because to him, "You're not a son, you're a failed experiment he thought burned away," and that line slices deep, pushing Gio to a crossroads: either accept that dehumanizing definition and sink into hatred and self-destruction, or redefine himself on his own terms, not as an experiment, not as a dragon's heir, but as a healer shaped by his own choices. The path he chooses, of course, is the latter, but the film makes him earn it. Guided by Raja Obat and supported by Raka and Dr. Sari, Gio decides to fight back not with guns or bombs, but with exposure and healing on a grander scale. They dig up evidence from the clinic ruins, smuggle internal documents out of Santosa Medica via a disillusioned junior researcher, and begin releasing testimonies from victims of the old experiments, people with mysterious scars, chronic illnesses, lost family members, using social media, underground news outlets, and community meetings to slowly turn public opinion against the supposedly benevolent corporation. This information war section of the movie is surprisingly gripping because it cuts between Gio's intimate moments with patients and the polished PR machine scrambling to maintain their image. Darmawan Santosa appears in interviews, denying allegations, framing Gio as a mentally unstable ex-con with a vendetta, and even produces doctored footage of Gio hurting someone during a treatment, and for a while, it works. The public turns suspicious, the clinic Dr. Sari runs gets vandalized by paid agitators, and the world feels once again stacked hopelessly against our protagonists. The emotional low point hits when Raja Obat is attacked in a staged mugging. That's clearly a warning, beaten badly enough that even his own skills can't fully fix the damage. In a quietly devastating hospital scene, we see Gio, hands trembling, trying to stabilize his mentor with the very techniques that Raja once used on him, but this time, they are not enough on their own, and he has to coordinate with modern doctors, including Dr. Sari, in a kind of symbolic fusion of traditional and contemporary medicine, to keep Raja alive. This moment visually and thematically underscores the film's message that no single system has all the answers, that healing is most powerful when knowledge is shared, not hoarded or pitted against each other. Raja Obat survives, but he's weakened, and in a tender bedside conversation, he tells Gio that he's taught him everything he can, that the rest of the fight will be Gio's alone, and he drops one final bombshell, a small, nearly burned photo he's kept hidden, showing a younger Darmawan Santosa standing shoulder to shoulder with a man who looks eerily like Gio, just older and harder, a man Raja finally names as Arya, the original, Sang Naga, Gio's father. The photo, along with coded notes on the back, points to a hidden lab facility under Santosa Medica's flagship hospital, where the second generation of experiments is rumored to be happening. Armed with this knowledge, Gio and his allies plan what essentially becomes the film's heist infiltration climax, but framed through a medical, not criminal, lens. Instead of stealing money or data, they are breaking into the belly of the beast to expose and shut down an ongoing atrocity. The sequence where Gio, using his medical cover and knowledge, slips into the hospital's restricted areas is intensely suspenseful. He blends in with the crowd, using a stolen badge procured by Raka and a security exploit shared by the junior researcher, his heart pounding as he rides the elevator down to levels labeled only with cryptic numbers. The lower he goes, the more the cinematography shifts, from bright, sterile whites to cold, clinical blues and greens, until he steps into a hidden wing that feels more like a sci-fi horror set than a real hospital. Rows of glass-walled rooms, patients hooked up to experimental machines, charts detailing Naga protocols that clearly mirror the old forbidden practices of his father's era. It's here, in a private observation room overlooking this sea of suffering, that Gio finally comes face to face with Arya, Sang Naga, Farrell himself, or what's left of him. The man is older now, yes, but his presence is still commanding, his eyes sharp, his movements slow but precise, and what's chilling is how calm he is, how utterly unfazed by seeing his supposedly dead experiment son standing before him. He greets Gio not with embrace or apology, but with clinical curiosity, remarking on how well his design has turned out despite the accident that removed him from the program. And though we, the audience, burn with rage on Gio's behalf, the film resists the temptation to make Arya a mustache-twirling villain, instead portraying him as someone who long ago replaced empathy with obsession, who builds elaborate rationalizations about sacrifices for the greater good. The confrontation between Gio and Arya is the emotional and philosophical heart of the third act. Gio demands to know if Arya ever once thought of him as a son, as a person, or if he was always just a petri dish with limbs, and Arya, in his maddeningly calm way, says that of course he thought of him often, but as proof of concept, as the one that got away, and that now, seeing him alive and functioning so well, he feels pride, a word that lands like acid, because it's so twisted, so utterly disconnected from the fatherly pride Gio might have secretly longed for all his life. When Arya offers Gio a place at his side, suggesting he could become the perfect fusion of old and new, healing and enhancement, with the resources of Santosa Medica behind him, it's basically the temptation of joining the dark side dressed in the language of progress, and for a brief, agonizing second, you see actual conflict in Gio's eyes. After all, he does want to help people, and here is a path to unlimited resources and reach, but then he remembers the child clinic, the children used as fodder, Raja's broken body in that hospital bed, his mother's tearful confession, and you see his spine straighten, his gaze harden, as he rejects Arya not just with words but with the full force of his being, declaring that he'll never stand on the same side as someone who sees human lives as data points. This rejection triggers the inevitable descent into violence, as Arya, realizing persuasion has failed, triggers security protocols, alarms blare, armed guards pour in, and Gio is forced to fight his way out, not with guns but with the very skills he's honed, strikes to nerves, pressure points that temporarily paralyze limbs, throws that use opponents' momentum against them. The action choreography in this sequence is outstanding, fluid and inventive, always grounded in the idea that Gio's body knowledge is his weapon, not brute force. The camera follows him in long takes as he moves through tight corridors, ducking, dodging, disabling rather than outright killing when he can, because at his core, he's still a healer who hates destroying life, and that choice, his refusal to become a killer even when justified, is what separates him morally from his father. The final showdown, interestingly, is not primarily between Gio and Arya, but between Gio and the system Arya helped create. As he reaches the main lab's central control room, he has to decide whether to initiate a failsafe that would wipe all data and release the current batch of test subjects, knowing that doing so will bring Santosa Medica's wrath down on him tenfold, or to simply escape with the evidence he's gathered, saving his own skin and maybe winning a slower, legal battle. And in a move that feels consistent with his character growth, he chooses the riskier, more selfless path, triggering a sequence that simultaneously uploads damning data to multiple media outlets through a backdoor hack orchestrated by their researcher ally, and unlocks the doors to the patients' rooms, freeing them and causing chaos that overwhelms security. In the ensuing pandemonium, Gio is nearly captured, but Raka and Dr. Sari, who have snuck into the building as part of a backup plan, create a diversion that allows him to escape. There's a harrowing moment where it looks like Raka might die in a confrontation with a guard, taking a bullet meant for Gio, and the film milks that suspense, but ultimately Raka survives, wounded but alive, giving Gio yet another reason to keep fighting for a better, less cruel future. Arya, meanwhile, disappears into the smoke of his crumbling kingdom, his fate left ambiguously unresolved, a choice that at first might frustrate some viewers craving clear-cut justice, but which I think works thematically. Because monsters like him rarely vanish neatly, they slither away, adapt, and re-emerge, and the film seems to be setting him up as a lingering threat, a living ghost of the old dragon, who might return in a future installment. In the aftermath, we see the domino effect of Gio's actions. News outlets show leaked footage of the hidden labs, public outrage surges, regulatory bodies announce investigations, Santosa Medica's stock plummets, and Dharmawan Santosa, the public face of the company, is forced to resign, his clipped press conference apology ringing hollow as protesters chant outside headquarters. But the film is careful to show that this isn't some magical, overnight victory. Victims still struggle with long-term effects, legal battles will take years, and the power structures around Santosa are bruised, not broken, but for the first time, the truth is out, and that light is something tangible. As for Gio, he emerges from this ordeal battered but more fully himself than ever. In the closing sequences, we see him and Dr. Sari transforming the old garage into a hybrid community health center and workshop, where people can get both affordable mechanical help and medical care, a literal merging of the practical and the healing, with Raka running the shop side and occasionally assisting with non-medical tasks. Their mother cooks food for waiting patients. Raja Obat, in a wheelchair but still sharp as ever, sits under a tree outside, dispensing grumpy wisdom and occasionally guiding Gio's hand when he hesitates over a particularly tricky case. The very final shot of the film is quietly poetic. A kid from the neighborhood, who earlier in the film idolized street thugs, now sits watching Gio carefully set a broken arm, eyes wide not with fear but with admiration, and as the camera pulls back, we see the dragon symbol, once a mark of underworld terror and corporate experimentation, now reimagined as the logo of Gio's clinic, stylized into something protective and nurturing rather than predatory, reclaiming that legacy from darkness into light. When the credits roll, you're left with that rare feeling of having watched a story that balanced bruising action, heartfelt drama, social commentary, and mythic symbolism, all anchored by a protagonist who feels deeply, achingly human. In terms of performances, even though the film's cast are all fictional in this conversation, Awas, Sang Naga Kembali feels like the kind of project that would be remembered for its leading man for years to come. The actor playing Geo gives a nuanced portrayal that tracks his evolution from wide-eyed sacrificial lamb to hardened yet empathetic healer warrior with incredible subtlety. Early on, his posture is slightly hunched, his gaze downward, his movements tentative, and you can almost see the echoes of prison in the way he flinches at sudden sounds even after he's free. As he grows into his power, there's a gradual straightening, a quiet confidence that never tips into arrogance, and what really sells it are the micro-moments, the way his eyes soften when a child calls him Dr. Geo, the way his jaw tightens when Santosa's lies play on TV, the way his hands sometimes shake when he's alone, the trauma still there beneath the resilience. The actor embodying Raja Obad, too, delivers a standout performance, creating a character who could easily have been a one-dimensional wise mentor but instead feels like a fully realized, flawed human being, bitter, haunted, yet still capable of deep, if gruff, affection. Every line he delivers feels lived in, shaped by years of both healing and hurting, and there's this one scene, in the hospital post-attack, where he apologizes to Geo for not telling him about his father sooner, saying in a cracking voice that he didn't want to lose another child to the dragon's shadow, and that line, that delivery, hits like a punch because it reveals how much he's been carrying silently. Raka, as a character, is also handled with admirable care, is not reduced to a plot device who simply sets the story in motion by committing the initial crime. He remains present, evolving, wrestling with guilt and trying to earn redemption not through grand gestures but through small, persistent acts of support, staying up late to help Geo prepare herbal infusions, offering his garage as a clinic even when it puts their livelihood at risk, standing between Geo and Santosa's goons even though he's not a fighter. The actor playing Raka manages to convey that mix of shame and love in nearly every scene, making their brotherly bond one of the film's emotional anchors. Dr. Sari, for her part, avoids the trap of being either a mere love interest or a token, strong woman archetype. She's written as a complex person with her own convictions, doubts, and arc, from skeptic of Geo's methods to collaborator, from someone who initially buys into the narrative of corporate medicine as the only, real, solution to someone who learns to challenge that system from within and without. Her chemistry with Geo is quietly compelling, built more on shared purpose and mutual respect than on overt romantic drama, which feels refreshing, and it opens the door for their relationship to be developed further in potential sequels without forcing it into a conventional romance arc too early. On the technical side, Awas, Sang Naga Kembali is a feast of deliberate choices that serve its story. The cinematography contrasts the cramped, decaying textures of prison life with the slick, glass and steel coldness of corporate spaces, making them feel like two sides of the same coin, one overtly brutal, the other politely oppressive. Color grading plays a big role too, with warm earthy tones dominating scenes of healing, family, and community, while colder hues mark scenes of institutional power, creating an almost subconscious emotional roadmap for viewers. The sound design deserves a special mention. The echo of metal doors in prison, the hum of fluorescent lights in the hidden labs, the layered soundscape of street markets, motorcycle engines, and distant call to prayer in the city, all immerse you deeply into this world. And the score weaves traditional Indonesian instruments with modern electronic elements, especially in those scenes where Geo taps into his dragon legacy body knowledge, creating a sonic signature that feels both ancient and futuristic, mirroring the film's thematic blend of old and new. Pacing-wise, the movie takes its time, especially in the first half. Some viewers might feel it's slow, but personally, I think that deliberate pacing is crucial for making Geo's transformation feel earned. We need to sit with his suffering in prison, his slow apprenticeship under Raja Obad, his awkward re-entry into society, to fully appreciate the weight of his later decisions. That said, there are a couple of subplots that, while interesting, could have been trimmed without losing much. The storyline of a minor corrupt cop, for example, or a brief detour into a rival gang's territory. These parts add texture, yes, but occasionally risk pulling focus from the core arc. However, when the film hits its stride, especially from the moment Geo begins investigating his origins onward, it moves with a gripping momentum that never really lets go. Thematically, Awas, Sang Naga Kembali is rich ground for discussion. At its heart, it's a story about identity and choice, about whether we are the sum of our blood and past, or the accumulation of the choices we make in response to that past. Gio is literally the child of a monster, shaped by a brutal prison system, but he chooses, again and again, to align his knowledge with healing, not harm, to break rather than repeat the cycle of dehumanization. The film also has a lot to say about systemic injustice, the way poor communities are preyed upon by both criminals and corporations, how the line between the two can blur disturbingly, how prisons, clinics, and labs can all become sites where human bodies are exploited under different justifications, yet it never feels like a dry lecture, because these themes are always embodied in characters and concrete situations: a mother crying outside a closed clinic, an inmate hiding his illness out of fear, a lab subject staring blankly through glass. Another powerful theme is the tension between tradition and modernity in medicine. Dr. Sari and Gio's evolving partnership symbolizes a possible way forward where ancestral knowledge isn't romanticized or blindly exalted, but also not dismissed. Instead, it's brought into dialogue with contemporary science, with both sides learning from each other. This is visually represented in their final clinic, where herbal jars sit on the same shelves as blood pressure monitors, where a poster about nutrition hangs next to a diagram of acupuncture points. It's a subtle but potent image of integration over domination. Culturally, the film taps into deep Indonesian currents: respect for elders and teachers, the weight of family shame and honor, the enduring popularity of herbal, jamu, and traditional healers, the distrust many feel toward faceless corporations and corrupt institutions. You can feel the filmmakers weaving these elements into the narrative not as exotic flavoring but as the living fabric of the world these characters inhabit. It's the kind of film you can imagine sparking conversations in Indonesian households about how much we trust doctors, what sacrifice for family should and shouldn't mean, how prisons treat people, and whether progress has to come at the expense of humanity. Audience reaction, in this imagined scenario, would likely have been intense. I can easily see social media buzzing with debates over Arya's philosophy, memes about Raja Obat's grumpy one-liners, and heartfelt posts from viewers who found in Gio's story a reflection of their own struggles with family, guilt, or feeling trapped by circumstances. I can also imagine real-world healers, doctors, and activists weighing in on the film's portrayal of medical ethics and corporate misconduct, pointing out parallels to actual scandals and systemic issues. If I had to point out flaws, aside from the occasional pacing wobble, I'd say that some of the corporate characters besides Darmawan and Arya are a bit thinly drawn, more archetypes than fully fleshed out people. The slick liaison Adrian, for instance, could have used a bit more nuance, maybe a hint of doubt or a personal stake that complicates his role as mere mouthpiece. Also, while the ambiguous fate of Arya works thematically, it might leave some viewers unsatisfied on a visceral level, craving that cathartic confrontation where he faces legal or physical consequences. A brief epilogue scene hinting more strongly at his next move could have struck a balance between closure and open-endedness. But these criticisms, to me, don't diminish the overall impact of Awas. Sang Naga Kembali. This is one of those films that lingers in your mind long after the credits roll, not just as a sequence of cool scenes, but as a kind of emotional imprint. You think about Gio every time you see a news story about prison overcrowding or medical malpractice. You hear Raja Obat's gravelly voice in your head when you're tempted to dismiss older knowledge as backward. You feel a twinge of recognition when someone talks about not knowing where they truly come from. As a long-form cinematic experience, it's the kind of story that feels tailor-made for a deep-dive review like this, one where we can unpack not only what happens but how it feels and what it might mean for us as viewers. It's not perfect, few films are, but its ambition, heart, and willingness to tackle messy, morally complicated territory make it stand out in the 2025 landscape of releases, especially in the Southeast Asian scene. So if you're still wondering whether to watch it, my answer is yes, absolutely. But go into it ready to feel uncomfortable at times, to sit with scenes of cruelty and tenderness side by side, to question what you'd do in Gio's place, whether you'd take the fall for someone you love, whether you'd keep healing a world that keeps trying to break you. And when you finish it, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your favorite scenes, the lines that stuck with you. Drop them down below, because this is the kind of film that deserves conversation, not just consumption. And for now, as we wrap up this long, winding journey through the corridors of Awas, Sang Naga Kembali, from prison shadows to corporate glass towers, from dragon myths to the fragile, stubborn glow of human decency, I'll close with just one question, and the more you sit with that idea, this man returning not as a simple avenger but as someone who understands the architecture of suffering, the more the film's title starts to feel like it's aimed at us, the audience. Because we all walk into stories like this expecting a certain flavor, expecting fists and payback and a clean scoreboard, but Awas. Sang Naga Kembali feels like it wants to make you uncomfortable with your own appetite for punishment, like it's asking, are you cheering because you want justice, or because you want to watch someone finally be allowed to hurt people back? And that's where the whole medicine angle becomes such a clever moral trap, because a healer can't pretend violence is the only language available, and Gio can't either, not anymore. Not once he's been taught how fragile bodies really are. There's a moment, conceptually, that this kind of story always reaches for, where the protagonist stands over someone who deserves it, someone who would have laughed at him when he was bleeding on a concrete floor, and instead of going for the obvious, he pauses, and you can feel the film holding its breath, because that pause is the real power. That pause is the difference between a man who survived and a man who became the prison itself. What makes Gio's journey feel emotionally immersive is how the premise positions humiliation as the true villain of the early chapters, because physical pain is brutal, yes, but humiliation is corrosive. It tells you nothing and then forces you to live in that nothingness day after day, and so when the Raja Obat appears as a rescuer, it's not just a rescue from injury, it's a rescue from erasure. It's someone saying, I see a person here, not a punching bag, and if you've ever been in a situation where you felt unseen, even on a smaller scale, that kind of recognition hits like warmth after years of cold. Now imagine the training, not as a montage you can skip, but as a reassembly of a broken self, learning to steady your hands, to listen more than you speak, to respect the boundary between curiosity and cruelty, because medicine is curiosity with ethics, and without ethics it becomes just another tool for domination, and Gio, with his history, is exactly the kind of student who could go either way. He could become a saint or a predator with a clean conscience, and the film's tension lives in that tight space between those possibilities. You can also feel how this setup recontextualizes strength, because prison strength is loud, it's posturing, it's intimidation, it's survival by making yourself bigger than you are, but medical strength is quiet, it's patience, it's discipline, it's the ability to delay gratification. And when a story forces its hero to trade one kind of strength for another, it often creates a more mature catharsis, because the payoff isn't just a victory, it's a transformation you can believe in. Spoiler controlled, the post-release portion becomes a slow uncoiling of secrets, and that's where the film can really flex its atmosphere, because origin stories aren't just about genealogy, they're about the invisible hands that shaped your life, the reasons doors opened or closed, the reasons certain people found you, protected you, used you, feared you. Gio, slowly uncovering a major secret means we're not dealing with a single reveal but a trail of evidence, a chain of small shocks that accumulate until the final truth feels inevitable, and the best kind of mystery does exactly that. It makes you look back and realize the answer was always there, hidden in plain sight, buried under assumptions. This is also where the dragon metaphor can become genuinely poetic, because dragons in storytelling aren't just monsters, they are guardians of treasure, keepers of forbidden knowledge, symbols of power that demands respect, and if Gio is the dragon, then the treasure might be the truth about his identity, the knowledge he carries, the dignity he reclaimed, and the warning, Awas, isn't merely fear, it's acknowledgement, it's the world admitting, too late, that they created something they can't control. Character-wise, Gio's most compelling trait, even from the bare-bones synopsis, is that he starts with love, and love is such a dangerous starting point because it can justify anything. You can ruin your own life out of love, you can commit sins out of love, you can endure hell out of love, and the story dares to ask whether that love was honored or exploited, and whether Gio's loyalty was met with loyalty or with convenience. The brother, looming over everything, is like a ghost in Gio's life, because even when the brother isn't on screen, he's in the premise, he's the reason the story exists, and that means any eventual confrontation, whether it's tender, angry, complicated, or all three, has the potential to be the emotional apex, because it's where sacrifice finally demands to be seen. And the Raja Obat, in a narrative like this, can carry the thematic torch. Medicine is about balance, dosage, timing, restraint, knowing that too much of a cure can become poison, and that principle can be applied to Gio's anger too. How much anger is useful, how much destroys you, how much keeps you alive, how much keeps you trapped. When we talk about cinematic impact, we're really talking about whether a movie can make you feel time, and this story is built on time, 3 years stolen, 3 years of suffering, 3 years of a life paused while the world kept turning, and that's why, emotionally, the release moment is never just freedom, it's disorientation, because freedom after trauma can feel like stepping into sunlight with eyes that forgot how to see. Everything is too bright, too fast, too loud, and the film can milk that for empathy, showing us that survival isn't a switch you flip, it's a habit you can't stop doing even when you don't need it anymore. Thematically, there's also something bold about centering healing in a story that starts in brutality, because it refuses to let violence be the final language. It says, yes, the world can break you, but the response doesn't have to be becoming a bigger hammer, it can be becoming a craftsman, someone who understands the human condition down to the bone and refuses to let ignorance dictate fate. But of course the tension remains, knowledge is power, and power attracts corruption, and that's where the origin secret can function like a dark inheritance, like a shadow that follows him no matter how pure his intentions are. Sometimes you can learn every remedy in the world and still not be able to cure your own past, and sometimes the truth about who you are becomes a wound you didn't know you had. One thing that makes stories like this resonate with audiences is that they mirror a very real emotional experience, the feeling of being misjudged, the feeling of carrying consequences for someone else's actions, the feeling of being punished by systems that don't care about nuance, and when Gio finally starts uncovering answers, it's not just plot progression, it's psychological relief, because uncertainty is its own prison. Not knowing why something happened to you can keep you trapped in self-blame forever, and even a painful truth can be more freeing than a comforting lie. If the film handles its pacing well, it will let these truths arrive like waves, first a hint, then a contradiction, then a clue that reframes what you thought you knew, and you'll feel that delicious frustration that makes you keep watching, because every time you think you have Gio figured out, the story reminds you that a person is not a headline, not a charge, not a rumor, not even a sacrifice, they are a history, and histories are messy. In terms of performances, this kind of material asks for a lead who can do stillness with storm underneath, because Gio can't be played as constantly explosive. If he's always loud, the prison breaks him, but we never see the cracks form, and the cracks are the point. We need to feel the compression, the way he holds himself together with sheer will, and then the subtle changes as he studies medicine, the way focus replaces panic, the way precision replaces desperation, the way he stops reacting and starts choosing. The Raja Obat role, meanwhile, works best when it's played with ambiguity that never turns into confusion. You want to trust him because he saved Gio, but you also want to wonder what he's seen, what he's done, why he's in a position to rescue anyone inside a place like that, and whether he's teaching Gio to heal or teaching him to become an instrument of a larger plan. And then there's the emotional sound of the film, because yes, plot matters, but a cinematic story like this lives in mood, in the way scenes breathe, in the way silence is allowed to linger after cruelty, in the way a quiet act of care can hit harder than an action beat if it's earned. A hand wrapped around a wounded wrist can feel like an earthquake if the story has convinced you that tenderness is rare and costly. When the film moves into the audience reaction territory, I can easily see how viewers would split into two camps, the ones who come for a comeback story and cheer for the dragon's return, and the ones who come for the emotional realism and find themselves shaken by how close the suffering feels. And the best films manage to satisfy both by making the comeback inseparable from the cost. You don't get the high without the bruises. You don't get the triumph without the trauma, and the dragon doesn't return as a fantasy, it returns as a consequence. Culturally, the idea of a Raja Obat also taps into something timeless, the reverence for elders or masters who carry knowledge outside official systems, the belief that real expertise isn't always found in institutions, and that healing can be both science and art, tradition and innovation, and that blend can give the film a flavor that feels rooted rather than generic, because it's not just, he learned to fight, it's, he learned to understand life, and that's a very different kind of hero's journey. What I keep coming back to is how the film's promise of a hidden origin can serve as a mirror for the audience. We all have stories about ourselves that we believe because they were handed to us, family narratives, societal labels, old mistakes that became identity, and Gio's Unraveling suggests that those stories can be wrong, incomplete, weaponized, and that discovering the truth is both liberation and heartbreak, because you don't just gain a new identity, you mourn the old one. And if Awas sang Naga Kembali sticks the landing emotionally, the final feeling it leaves you with won't simply be excitement, it'll be something heavier and more satisfying, the sense that survival is not the end of the story, that healing is not gentle, that truth can be a scalpel, and that the most frightening dragon is not the one that burns cities, but the one that walks back into your life with calm eyes and finally says, I remember everything, and I'm done pretending I don't. So picking up from where we left off, I want you to imagine something for a second. You've just watched Gio walk out of that hospital after blowing the doors open on Santosa Medica's darkest secrets, the city buzzing with outrage, the news cycle spinning, and the camera slowly tracking behind him as he steps back into the night air, neon lights reflecting off rain-slick streets, and you feel this huge exhale of relief, like we've finally reached the end of the tunnel. But what Awas sang Naga Kembali does so beautifully is refuse to treat that moment as some neat full stop. It lets it be what it really is in life when someone does something that big. It's not an ending, it's a beginning of a more complicated chapter, and the movie's last stretch, those quieter epilogue-style scenes of Gio, Raka, Dr. Sari, and Raja Obat building that little hybrid clinic out of the old garage, are actually what gives the story its real emotional weight, because they show that even when you take down a piece of an empire, you still have to wake up the next morning and live with yourself, your choices, your scars. And that's where I want to go deeper now, into all the connective tissue of this film that isn't just about what happens, but how it makes you feel, and why certain choices just lodge themselves under your skin, because for a movie that sells itself on prison brutality, dragon myths, and corporate conspiracies, what stays with me most are the quiet details, a hand trembling just slightly before a treatment, a glance between brothers that holds years of unsaid apologies, the way a neighborhood's attitude toward a man can shift from fear to awe to something like protectiveness over the course of 2.5 hours. Let's rewind a bit and sit longer with that prison segment, because it's more than just a backstory. It's like this living, breathing organism that shapes everything afterward, and the filmmakers knew that. You can tell from the way the camera moves in that space, almost like it's another inmate, stuck inside with them, pacing the same routes every day. The early scenes of Gio stumbling into that world feel almost documentary-like in how unglamorous they are, the overcrowded cell he's assigned to, where there's just this thin, foul-smelling mattress shoved in a corner left for him, the way older prisoners give him those slow, appraising looks, like they're measuring how long he'll last before he breaks, the guard who smirks as he throws Gio's personal items onto the floor because he knows that asserting tiny bits of power is how he survives the grind of his own job. And what hits even harder on a rewatch is how much of the brutality isn't in the violence itself but in the constant awareness that violence can erupt at any moment. The soundtrack leans into this with little audio cues, keys jangling, distant shouts, the scrape of metal on concrete, that never let you fully relax, and that carries into Gio's body language in the outside world scenes later, reminding you that trauma doesn't vanish when the bars do. One of the things I really admire is how the movie doesn't turn prison into some magical dojo where Gio learns a cool skill set and then just leaves as a badass. Instead, his education under Raja Obat is constantly interrupted by the ecosystem around them, by bureaucracy, by petty rivalries, by the simple, ugly reality of being caged. There's that scene where Raja is teaching Gio how to read subtle temperature changes on the skin with the back of his fingers, and midway through, a guard barges in and drags an inmate away for questioning, no explanation, no recourse, and the lesson just stops. Days later, the guy comes back battered, half-conscious, and it's up to Gio, under Raj's sharp, emotionless instructions, to try to keep him alive. That's such a crucial tonal note. Learning happens here not in a serene monastery but in moments stolen from chaos, which makes every piece of knowledge feel precious and hard-earned. When Gio finally leaves, it would have been easy for the movie to just flip a switch and show him instantly applying his prison-hardened skills in the outside world, but instead it lets that transition have friction. The first time he tries to sleep in his own bed, the softness of the mattress actually disturbs him. He rolls to the floor and sleeps on a woven mat instead, because that's what his body now recognizes as normal. When his mother cooks him his favorite childhood dish, you can see this flicker of disconnection on his face when he tastes it, because he's been living off watery stew and hard rice for so long that real flavor almost feels like an intrusion. These tiny details are what make his journey believable, and it also makes his eventual embrace of his healer identity feel like an act of conscious rebuilding, not just something that naturally happens. Now let's talk a bit more about Raja Obat and this whole master and student dynamic, because that's one of the emotional cores of the film that could have so easily slipped into cliché, but somehow doesn't. Early on, Raja Obat keeps Gio at arm's length, and you sense that it's partly self-protection. He's seen too many young men like Geo come in hopeful and leave in a body bag, and he doesn't want to invest in another doomed case. But there's also this hint that he's punishing himself through his isolation, that taking on a student again would force him to confront a failure in his own past, and when we later learn about his history with Arya, that retroactively makes those early scenes even more painful. Here's a man who once tried to steer his fellow disciple, Geo's father, away from a dark path and failed, and now he's looking at Arya's son, recognizing echoes of that same fire, and asking himself if he dares to try again. The way Raja tests Geo is so different from the usual movie training sequences. He doesn't set up elaborate physical challenges, he gives him moral puzzles disguised as medical ones. An inmate who's been his enemy comes begging for help with a festering wound, and Raja does nothing, just watches to see what Geo will do. When Geo, trembling with leftover fear, still decides to treat the guy, Raja smirks, but there's warmth in his eyes for the first time, or the time he instructs Geo to ration a limited amount of a rare herb between two patients, a younger man with a chance at a fuller life, and an older man who's dying but in agony, and then steps back and refuses to advise him, forcing Geo to carry the burden of that choice. Later, when Geo can't sleep, haunted by the pained eyes of the man he couldn't fully help, Raja sits beside him and tells him, "This is the real weight of what we do. If you ever stop feeling that, you should stop treating people." And that's such a raw, honest take on responsibility that it sticks with you as he faces far bigger decisions later in the story. And since we're digging into characters, let's peel back another layer on Raka, because he's such a great example of a supporting character who feels like the protagonist of his own unseen movie, from the first flashback where we see him behind the wheel, drunk and panicked after the accident, to the garage scenes later where he's trying to fix engines as if by fixing machines he can atone for what he couldn't fix in his life. Every moment with him crackles with suppressed guilt. You notice how often he starts to say something heavy and then swallows it, how he'll grip a wrench too tightly when Geo walks by, like his body is trying to channel emotions into something solid. The scene where he finally confesses the full truth to Geo is powerful not just because of what he says but how he says it, stumbling, almost incoherent, words spilling out in the wrong order, like he's been rehearsing the confession in his head for years, but it all unravels in the moment, and Geo's reaction, swinging at him, breaking down, then clutching him in a hug that's half attack, half desperate. Cling is messy in exactly the way real family confrontations are. There's no clean forgiveness, no perfect script, just two broken people trying to figure out if they can still be brothers now that the last illusions between them are gone. Dr. Sari, too, deserves more attention, because she's our window into how the legitimate medical world views someone like Geo, and by extension, how societies often categorize and rank different kinds of knowledge. At first, she sees him as a threat not because she's mean-spirited, but because she's been trained in a system that measures legitimacy through degrees, certifications, and peer-reviewed studies. And Geo doesn't fit any of those boxes. Their early clashes, in that cramped clinic, where she's overworked and underfunded, are particularly sharp. She accuses him of playing with people's lives. He counters that she sends people away with paracetamol and a smile when what they really need is time, touch, and someone who listens. Neither is entirely right or wrong, and the film lets that tension simmer instead of resolving it cheaply. What slowly changes her mind isn't some dramatic miracle, but accumulation. She sees how patients calm down when Geo speaks to them, how he takes the extra few minutes to teach a mother simple massage techniques to relieve her child's cough, how he sits with an old man and asks about his loneliness instead of just his symptoms. There's a moment where she returns from a conference full of slick presentations about scaling healthcare solutions, and walks into the garage clinic to find Geo treating someone under a flickering bulb with nothing but his hands and a bowl of warm water, and you can almost see her thinking, we might be missing something in our obsession with machines. The film doesn't turn her into a wholesale convert either. She still values science rigorously, still pushes Geo to document his methods, to test what he does under controlled conditions, and that pushback is important because it keeps him from sliding into blind mysticism. Their partnership by the end is less East meets West cliché and more two people with different toolkits deciding to build something together. And then, hanging over all of this, like a storm cloud you can see reflected in every puddle but not touch, is the figure of Arya, the dragon. So let's talk about how the film uses him as both a character and a symbol. Even before Geo discovers the biological connection, the legend of Sang Naga is omnipresent. Graffiti on alley walls, old songs men hum half forgotten, a tattoo on a thug's arm, A whispered warning from an older lady at the Warren who once saw his work in the aftermath of a fight. He exists as a kind of urban myth about power, both feared and weirdly admired, and that duality is one of the film's key ideas, how we can simultaneously condemn and glamorize those who wield power without restraint. When Arya finally appears, the movie makes a bold choice not to reveal him in some huge action sequence but in a relatively quiet room. When Geo steps into that observation booth over the hidden lab and finds him standing there, hands folded behind his back, watching monitors, the lighting is clinical, no dramatic shadows, just the harsh white of fluorescent bulbs, and that choice strips him of any seductive mystery. He's a man, aging, lined, very much human, which makes his monstrous choices all the more chilling. He's not some supernatural demon, he's someone with years of education, once maybe some idealism, who methodically chose to treat people as means to an end. The dialogue in that scene is crackling with subtext, and on a second viewing, you catch even more of the small power plays. Arya steps closer but doesn't breach Geo's personal space, as if to say, I recognize you as an equal, a fellow expert, which for someone like him is the closest thing to an embrace. He refers to Geo by his full name, enunciating each syllable as if savoring a creation's label rather than acknowledging a son. When Geo demands, did you ever look for me? Arya doesn't answer the question directly. He talks instead about how the project survived, how the formula was refined, making it clear where his priorities have always lain. And it's in this interaction that the title of the film, Awas, sang Naga Kembali, watch out. The dragon returns, takes on a more layered meaning. Before you watch it, you might assume it's about Arya returning to the scene, or about his legend resurfacing, but by the end, you realize the movie has been asking a more provocative question. What does it mean for the dragon to return in a different form, in a son who refuses to follow his father's footsteps, who inherits the same raw power but points it in the opposite direction? The return isn't just of a person, it's of a force, an ancient embodied knowledge of the human body, that can be used to dominate or to liberate, and the warning in that, Awas, is not just to the poor and vulnerable, but to the people in power who think they can control everything. They too should watch out, because the things they unleash don't always stay obedient. There's another layer to that dragon imagery that I think is worth exploring. In many Asian cultures, dragons aren't always just destructive monsters like in some Western stories. They are also symbols of wisdom, of natural forces, of guardianship. The film seems to be reclaiming that idea by the end. When Geo rebrands the dragon symbol as the logo of his clinic, it's a deliberate statement that this power, this lineage, doesn't have to be tied forever to fear and violence. It can be reinterpreted as protection, as healing, and that's a pretty radical notion when you map it onto heritage more broadly. Can we take the worst parts of our past, personal or collective, and not just reject them, but transform them into something that helps others? Geo naming his clinic something like Clinic Naga Penjaga, the Guardian Dragon Clinic, which the film hints at in a blink and you miss it signboard shot, is him answering that question with a shaky but determined, yes. I also want to dive a bit deeper into the stylistic choices around the action sequences, because on the surface, they are tight, kinetic, thrilling, but they also carry thematic weight in how they are choreographed. In prison, when Geo is still inexperienced, fights are messy, chaotic, full of wild swings and grappling in cramped spaces. The camera is handheld, a little jittery, reflecting his lack of control. We as the audience feel that claustrophobia, that sense that anything could blindside him at any second. But by the time we get to the infiltration of the hidden lab, the style has shifted. Geo moves with precision, the cinematography echoes that with longer takes and smoother tracking shots, almost like a dance where he's dictating the rhythm, and crucially, he uses what he knows in ways that avoid unnecessary death, a thumb pressed just so at a nerve cluster to drop a guard, a strike at a leg tendon that disables instead of kills. When he does hurt someone, you see pain on his face too, a flinch of empathy, like part of him registers every body he has to break as a personal defeat, and that's exactly the kind of moral awareness that separates him from both the street thugs and the clinical cruelty of his father's experiments. Speaking of those experiments, the way the film visualizes the hidden lab could have so easily turned into generic sci-fi tropes, but it keeps one foot firmly in the reality of underfunded, repurposed hospital spaces. There are no sleek chrome corridors with blue holograms. Instead you get retrofitted basements, painted over and scrubbed but still bearing the scars of their original uses, faint outlines where old pipes used to run, doors that stick slightly, flickers in the lights. That physicality grounds the horror. you can believe that a big medical corporation could hide this under an actual, above-board hospital, especially in a system where oversight is lax and money speaks loudly. The visual storytelling here is subtle but effective, the way certain wards are labeled with innocuous acronyms but, when decoded, reference the Naga protocols, the way cameras are positioned to monitor patients but not the staff, reinforcing the one-sided nature of observation and accountability. I also want to touch on the film's use of sound around the dragon myth. Whenever stories about Sang Naga are told, whether it's kids whispering under a streetlight or Raja Obat grudgingly referencing the old days, there's this faint, almost subliminal motif in the score, a low, drawn-out note on a suling, bamboo flute, layered over a deep drum beat, like a slow heartbeat. The motif reappears, slightly altered, in moments where Gio unconsciously taps into that inherited body knowledge, when he saves the inmate during the riot, when he improvises a treatment in the garage, when he stands over a lab subject in the hidden facility. But by the final scenes, after he's made his choice to define his own path, that motif evolves, adding warmer harmonies, moving from minor to a more ambiguous, hopeful mode, as if the music itself is acknowledging that the dragon's theme has been rewritten. It's the kind of detail you might not consciously notice on first watch, but it works on you emotionally, threading these moments together. And then there are all the little world-building touches that make this story feel specific and lived in, the handwritten signs in the neighborhood, offering cheap data packages and noodle promotions, the open drains along the street outside the garage, buzzing with mosquitoes, the way everyone seems to know everyone's business, and news spreads not just through phones but through the old aunties who sit outside their houses in the evenings, the motorcycle taxis honking impatiently as Gio pauses in the middle of the street, lost in thought, even the specific brands of cheap cigarettes that inmates trade in prison. These details might seem trivial, but they are what convince you that this isn't some abstract morality play. It's happening in a real, contemporary Indonesian city with all its textures and contradictions. Audience reaction-wise, if we imagine how people responded in 2025, I can easily picture Awas, Sang Naga Kembali, becoming a kind of cult favorite, especially among younger viewers who are hungry for stories that blend genre entertainment with social commentary. The prison sequences would spark debates about how inmates are treated, whether rehabilitation is even possible in spaces like that, while the Santosa Medica plot would tap into anxieties about privatized healthcare, experimentation on marginalized bodies, and the ethics of innovation. I can also imagine herbalists and practitioners of traditional medicine feeling both seen and scrutinized by the way the film portrays their world, respected through Raja Obat and Gio's skills, but also challenged by the reminder that any form of power, even healing power, can be abused. In terms of cultural impact, I think one of the film's quiet legacies would be how it reframes masculinity. Gio is physically capable, yes, but his defining trait is not how many people he can beat up, it's how many people he can help. His strength is measured in restraint, in his willingness to carry guilt without letting it crush him, in his capacity to forgive his brother while still holding him accountable. Raka, too, is allowed to be vulnerable, to cry, to seek forgiveness, without being framed as weak. Even Raja Obat, with all his gruffness, is shown crying silently in one late-night scene when he thinks Gio is asleep, whispering an apology to the ghosts of the children he couldn't save from Arya's influence. Those images of men expressing grief, fear, tenderness, are powerful, especially in a cinematic landscape that often equates male worth with stoic violence. And look, we have to talk about the possibility of sequels, because the movie teases them in such a tantalizing way. Arya's escape at the end, the unresolved threads around Santosa Medica's network of partner clinics, the hint that there might be other projects like Gio out there, these all point toward a broader universe where the dragon legacy isn't confined to one city or one corporation. You could easily imagine a follow-up film where Gio has to confront not just the remnants of his father's empire, but other people who were touched by the same experiments in different ways, some who turned into monsters, others who, like him, are trying to do good but are haunted by the knowledge that their abilities came from suffering. And emotionally, a sequel could dive deeper into his relationship with Dr. Sari as they try to navigate a partnership that blends professional collaboration, shared trauma, and budding affection, all while being targeted by powerful enemies. But even if no sequel ever comes, I think Awas, Sang Naga Kembali, stands alone as a complete, satisfying arc about someone taking ownership of a story that was written for them before they were even old enough to speak. Gio goes from being a passive figure at the mercy of systems, family expectations, courts, prison hierarchies, corporate machinations, to an active author of his own narrative, and that transformation is subtly encoded in the way he talks over the course of the film. Early on, he uses a lot of passive structures. I was sent. I was beaten. I was given. Later, he starts saying, I chose, I will do, I won't allow, and by the final act, when he confronts Arya and then pushes the button to blow open the lab's secrets, he speaks in clear, declarative sentences, no hedging, no shrinking. The scriptwriters really understood that language is one of the tools we use to define ourselves, and they let that evolution play out quietly in his dialogue. One more aspect that's worth highlighting is how the film treats faith and spirituality. It doesn't center any one religion overtly, but you see characters engaging with different practices. Gio's mother praying quietly in her corner of the house, Raja Obat muttering what might be old mantras or just personal chants while he works, inmates drawing protective symbols on their cell walls, and these acts aren't dismissed as superstition, nor are they exalted as magic solutions. They exist alongside the medical knowledge, the criminal realities, the corporate scheming, forming another strand in the tapestry of how people survive and make sense of their suffering. There's a small but powerful scene where Gio, after learning about his father's true nature, sits in a place of worship, not really knowing what to say or ask, and just sits, letting the ambient sounds wash over him. And the film doesn't put words or epiphany voiceovers in his mouth. It just gives him that space to be a human being overwhelmed by the enormity of his situation. That kind of restraint is something I really respect. So when I step back and look at Awas, Sang Naga Kembali, as a whole, it feels like a rare blend of intensity and introspection. It gives you the visceral satisfaction of seeing injustice challenged, of watching a downtrodden figure rise, but it doesn't lie to you about how messy, incomplete, and ongoing that process is. For every victory, Gio saving a life, exposing a lab, reconciling with his brother, there are lingering wounds, both physical and emotional. The film respects its audience enough to leave some questions unanswered. What exactly will happen to all those patients from the lab long term? How will Gio handle the inevitable hero worship that might come his way? Will he ever fully make peace with the fact that part of his gift comes from a place of deep exploitation? Those are questions you can carry with you after the credits, maybe even see echoes of them in your own world. And that, to me, is the hallmark of a story worth revisiting, discussing, rewatching, not just because it's fun or cool, though it absolutely has those elements, but because it sneaks into the quieter parts of your mind and sets up camp there, nudging you to think about the systems you live in, the legacies you've inherited, and the choices you'll make moving forward. So if you've seen Awas, Sang Naga Kembali, I genuinely love to know which part hit you the hardest. Was it the prison brutality, the reveal of Gio's origins, the showdown with Arya, or the more intimate moments in that little garage clinic at the end? And if you haven't seen it yet but you've somehow made it this far into this deep dive, I hope this has given you a sense not just of what happens, but of why this film might be worth 2.5 hours of your life. For now, I'll leave you standing in that final shot, with Gio and his unofficial family under the dim light of the clinic sign, the dragon symbol glowing softly above them, cars rushing by, life going on, and somewhere out there in the shadows, an older dragon licking his wounds and plotting his next move. The story feels complete, but the world it creates is still very much alive, waiting to be explored further in our imaginations or, hopefully, in future films. And as we close out this extended journey through every bruise, every secret, every small act of courage in Awas, Sang Naga Kembali, I'll ask you once more, as part of this ongoing conversation between storyteller and listener,